Greetings from bead 326, and today we're going to look at some of the ideas that are associated with capitalism. First of all, by way of introduction, we often think and say that humankind has been through three major revolutions. The first happened around 11,000 years ago. That was the agricultural revolution, where we learned how to domesticate plants and animals, which led to a growth in population. And cities appeared, technology appeared, that type of thing. And then the second revolution is the Industrial Revolution, primarily associated with the 18th and the 19th centuries. And that is what led power to be applied to machines, and people moved from rural settings to work in urban settings, and you have a new middle class that emerges as owners of the means of production. And the third revolution is one we're living through right now, the technological revolution, the digital age. So we know right now that we live in an age of turmoil. We have all these forms of communication, social media, no one knows how to control them yet, that type of thing. So we're in the midst of that revolution. Today we're going to focus on the second revolution, which is chapter 23, the Industrial Revolution, and an ism associated with that revolution, and that's capitalism. Now, we're speaking in very broad terms. Not everyone who calls himself a capitalist would embrace all of these notions. So there's a lot of nuances to it that we can't get into here, but for our general purposes, here are some of the major ideas associated with capitalism. So here's number one. Now, this is going to be a point made by William Graham Sumner in a paragraph that I'm going to have you read in association with chapter 23. And it's the notion of economic individualism. Every single person is responsible for their own economic well-being. You have to figure out how to survive in this world. And you can't rely on other people. You can't rely on other agencies, especially the government. You have to be responsible for your own economic well-being. Therefore, according to this principle, if you're not doing well, it's your own fault. Here's number two. Laissez-faire, hands off, don't interfere. That's the approach to the government that they prefer. So, no or little regulation. Now you can see why those who own the means of production, the factories, favored this principle. It allows them to run their factories and their businesses the way they want to. They don't have to be too concerned about government coming in and telling them that people can only work for 8 hours a day. They prefer to have people work for 12 hours a day or whatever. So, as little government as possible. No or little regulation. Here's number three. Obey natural laws. Such as supply and demand. So just as Newton, as we saw in the Enlightenment, argued that the universe operates in a physical sense on the basis of natural laws like gravity, a lot of these early capitalists argue that there were natural laws that govern the way economies work as well. One of them is supply and demand. So if there's too much of something, the price will go down, and the process will correct itself. If there's not enough of something, it'll be more expensive and a correction will be made. So just let the market unfold and take care of itself. Here's number 4. Free trade, which would mean no tariffs. So, people who believe in free trade, and let's say you own a factory, you want food to come in from other parts of the world to compete with American-made food. That competition will increase the supply, which will then lower the cost of food. So you are against tariffs because those are an artificial way of interfering with the natural laws of economics. So what we've seen the Trump administration do is administer tariffs to try to make corrections between the United States and countries like China, and then to offset the penalty of those tariffs, subsidies were paid to farmers to try to make up the difference. And of course that is a departure from free trade, and that's the implication of tariffs. But a true free trade capitalist does not believe in tariffs, because free trade will lead to more communication and trade between countries and more prosperity for the greatest number of people. Here's number 5. Freedom of contract. Now, by this they mean that each individual worker is responsible to negotiate his or her contract with whoever their employer might be. So what the middle class who owns the means of production want to see is each worker individually negotiating. What they don't want to see is workers getting together and collectively making demands. And they don't want to see workers getting together and forming labor unions, that type of thing. They want each worker to operate on his or her own interests and negotiate their contracts privately. You can see the connection between 5 and number 1. So this really means no labor unions. Now, what capitalists argued is not that it's perfect, but it's a utilitarian approach whereby the greatest good will be available to the greatest number of people if these kinds of policies are followed. These were embraced during the Industrial Revolution, especially by the middle class who owned the means of production, who owned the factories where the workers worked. So that's our look at some of the ideas, not all, some of the ideas associated with capitalism.